The starting left tackle and the head strength and conditioning coach are two of the most essential positions in any college football program. And now we're getting closer to finding out who will be leading those roles at Notre Dame for the foreseeable future.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, and welcome into Locked On Irish. Today is Monday, December 18th, and thank you for getting your week started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer covering college football for Fox Sports. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOn and use code LOCKEDON for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Is it just me, or does the Stanford game feel like it happened an eternity ago? I know it's only been a little over 3 weeks, but there's just been so much news that's come out since then about the Notre Dame football program, and we got more over the weekend. Marcus Freeman spoke to the media on Saturday for the first time since the Monday after that Stanford game, and it was also Mike Brown's official introduction as the new wide receivers coach. And most of what Marcus Freeman had to say is what you'd expect for this time of year as the team starts to turn their attention to the bowl game. But the one thing, the most surprising thing to come out of Saturday's presser is that Charles Jagusah, the true freshman, has taken all of the first-team reps at left tackle since Joe Alt decided to opt out of the bowl game. This is obviously a big deal for that bowl game and certainly the future of the offensive line. So I'll address that more in segment 3. I want to start with the real big news that came out on Sunday when friend of the program John Brice from FootballScoop reported that Notre Dame is closing in on hiring Loren Landow as the new director of football performance. Landow would replace Fred Hale, who has been working in an interim role ever since Matt Balis abruptly re-signed the day before fall camp started way back in July. Now, Hale had worked under Balis for 2 years prior to that, so it made sense at the time for Marcus Freeman to promote from within. You don't want to have to go make an outside hire right at the start of training camp, right as the season just gets going. So Notre Dame gave Fred Hale the entire season to lead the charge, and it sounds like he did a good job. But really, it seemed like ever since the season ended, Marcus Freeman was focused on finding a new guy from outside the program to oversee football performance going forward. And it appears that Loren Landow is going to be that guy. Now, to be clear, nothing is official yet. I'm recording this pretty late. It's 10:30 p.m. Pacific time, and at this point, there has been no official report on an agreement between the two parties, but early Sunday afternoon, John Brice said the two sides are working on finalizing the deal, and that report has been backed up by Matt Freeman from Irish Sports Daily and Tyler James from Notre Dame Insider. So at this point, I'm going to act as if it's a done deal because it certainly seems that way. Maybe by the time that you're listening to this, there'll be some sort of confirmation. But for today, let's dive into Landau's background, and I'll give you my instant reaction to why I think Freeman is looking to go in this direction, and plus what it could mean for the future of the program. The vast majority of Landau's experience has been in the private sector. He has been in the athletic performance business for about 30 years, and he owns and operates his own performance center in Denver, the astutely named Landow Sports Performance Center, which happens to be one of the most accomplished and recognizable facilities in the field in the entire country. According to the Landow Performance Center website, he has trained over 1,000 professional athletes, including 70 NFL All-Pros and over 20 first-round draft selections in the NFL, including a couple guys you might have heard of, like Christian McCaffrey, Peyton Manning, and Von Miller. And he most recently served as the head strength and conditioning coach for the Denver Broncos from 2018 through March of 2023 before he was let go once Sean Payton took over as the new head coach. I'm going to read you a quick excerpt from his bio because I think it provides a good explanation of his specialties in the field. Quote, "The heart of Coach Landau's training philosophy is to maximize human performance efficiently and effectively while decreasing the likelihood of injury. His science-based training methods make proper movement mechanics second nature for athletes, thus allowing them to do all the right things from the wrong positions, such as those that often manifest in sport." End quote. So he is not just like your typical strength coach. He really focuses on a player's movement in whatever sport they do. I know he also worked with a ton of MMA guys in trying to maximize how they move in whatever role they're asked to do in their sport. Now, I'll admit, I was pretty surprised when I heard Loren Landow was going to be the guy because prior to the conversations I had this morning, I had never heard of his name before. I'm not super in tune to all the strength and conditioning coaches in the NFL or the best strength coaches for pro athletes and Olympic athletes because I'm not one of them. But once I started doing my research on him, it didn't take long to realize that this dude is an expert in the field. I don't even think that's debatable. You can't get to where he is and work with the type of people that he has worked with unless you're one of the absolute best in the industry. Like, there's no way that a guy like Peyton Manning or Christian McCaffrey or any of the Olympic athletes that he's trained with, people who are maniacal about becoming the best version of themselves that they can be on the field, like those people don't trust just anyone. The fact that they were willing to work with Loren Landow says a lot about what they think of him. And even though I didn't know who he was before this, I think that says pretty much all you need to know about the guy's understanding of maximizing athletes' performance. But I was surprised because he doesn't have any experience running a college strength and conditioning program before. That's not to say he doesn't have experience working with college-age athletes, because he clearly does. He helps a ton of athletes get ready for the combine and things like that. But even though he ran the Broncos strength program for 5 years, that's so much different than doing it in college because, for one thing, you're dealing with grown men and not college kids who are between the ages of like 19 and 22 and have to go to class like Notre Dame student athletes have to do. And the calendar is so different. Like the structure of the NFL calendar and what coaches can and can't do and when they can work with their players is completely different than what it is in college. Like outside of the fact that both of those sports play on weekends in the fall, like the rest of the offseason calendar is so different. And even though he does have a ton of experience in the field, he just doesn't have experience in the role that he's going to handle at Notre Dame. Now, I'm sure that is something that Marcus Freeman and Loren have talked extensively about during their conversations, but it's definitely noteworthy. And I've also heard, and this was also in John Brice's report as well, that Notre Dame inquired about a couple active college strength coaches from around the country before they got to this point. David Ballou is a name that has come up often. He is the current strength and conditioning coach for Nick Saban at Alabama. And Ballou actually came to Notre Dame to work alongside Matt Balis back in Balis' first year at Notre Dame in 2017. They were basically co-directors of football performance. Like they worked hand in hand throughout that first year. Then Ballou took the head job at Indiana, which is where he played college football. And then he ultimately took the head job at Alabama in 2020. So he's been there for a few years now, and Notre Dame took a really big swing at David Ballou. Just the idea of trying to poach the strength coach of Alabama is bold in itself, but I've heard from some credible sources that Notre Dame was willing to offer him a lot of money, but Ballou opted to stay at Alabama. John Brice reported that he is expected to restructure his deal with Alabama, so maybe he got a raise out of the whole deal, but credit to Notre Dame for even trying to get that done. John Brice also reported that Notre Dame looked at Aaron Wellman for the job, who just finished up his fourth season at Indiana. And it is kind of funny, right, that Notre Dame was looking at the current strength and conditioning coach at Indiana and the guy who took it, or the guy who had his job prior to him. But Wellman is not just the Indiana strength coach. He worked for the New York Giants for a few years and also spent some time at Michigan as well. So it's not like Freeman wasn't looking at other college strength coaches. He was, and by all accounts, this was a very long and extensive search that spanned the entire country, different levels, looked a lot at the NFL, looked a lot in college, and honestly, I expected Freeman to go with someone who's Bayless-like. Ballou certainly would have fit that mold. They're both like carbon copies of what you would expect a strength coach to look and act like. And Landow doesn't really fit that mold, but that does not mean that he can't be really good at it. But for as old school as Marcus Freeman can seem sometimes, he still has some new school ideas and approaches to certain things, and specifically player performance. So coming up next, I'll explain why I believe Marcus Freeman landed on Loren Landow. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Before we move on, I wanted to take a moment to remind you to please subscribe on YouTube or wherever listening to the podcast. You can also help out the show by liking the video below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can rate the podcast 5 stars. All of that good stuff. I really do appreciate it. Okay, now why would Marcus Freeman target Loren Landow for this position? We've already talked a little bit about his background. Let's get into the why. And if I wanted to criticize this move, it would be pretty easy, right? I could just say he doesn't have any experience as a college strength coach, and the one time he had a strength program, and the one time he led it, he got fired. Case closed. That's it. Bad hire. Obviously, it goes a lot deeper than that. About a month ago, when Marcus Freeman was asked about what he was looking for in the new strength coach, he said he wants someone who's on the cutting edge of sports science and recovery, someone who understands all the demands of his players, both on the field and off the field as Notre Dame students, because, you know, the physical toll that playing football takes on the body is one thing. What being in college, and specifically a Notre Dame college student, and all the work that they have to do off the field is incredibly demanding, and that takes a toll on their bodies as well. Like, even though they're young, even though they're in amazing shape, like, it's tough, man. It is very rigorous to be a student athlete at any school, particularly one like Notre Dame, where the pressure on all student athletes is so high, and also the pressure to just get by and succeed as students is a whole nother thing that they have to deal with. Now, whoever is the strength and conditioning coach certainly has to take that into account, because it's not like professional athletes where they're probably getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep every single night in a very expensive bed with the best mattress you can find. Most of these players, at least the young ones, are probably sleeping in a long twin in a lofted dorm, right? Like, it's not perfect conditions, but Landow would certainly fit the mold of someone who is on the cutting edge of sports science and recovery. His entire business is predicated on understanding every single movement from an athlete and how they go through their life in and outside of the lines. And despite the fact that Landow was let go when Sean Payton took over for the Broncos, by all accounts, he was really liked by all the players while he was there. Multiple Broncos players who worked with him had a lot of great things to say about him, and this support was backed up in the NFLPA report card for the Denver Broncos that came out earlier this year. So if you don't know what I'm referring to, the NFL Players Association started doing these surveys where they ask a vast majority of the players in the league. They asked 1,300 players to fill out a survey, which is over 60% of the active players in the league. And they asked them to grade several categories within their organization, including things like locker rooms, facilities, travel, training staff, strength coaches, treatment of families, nutrition, sports science, analytics, all of that stuff. They gave letter grades out to each of them, and then at the end of it, they compiled a report card for every single team, and it was very interesting because you got to really get a good insight into how the players felt about the franchises that they play for. So the Broncos finished 20th of 32 teams in the league in terms of like the average grade on their report card. Do you want to know who received the highest grade of the Denver Broncos players? It was the strength coaches with an A-, which is certainly ironic considering it had the highest grade. And then actually by the time that this report came out, by that point, Landow had already been fired, which is probably terrible for him to read about, even though that the survey was done before he was let go. But he got an A-. And like I said, it was the highest grade of any of the other Denver Broncos categories. Now, for context, several other teams in the NFL, their strength coaches had a grade of an A or an A+. So he wasn't like the most liked strength coach in the entire league, but he was the best part of the Denver Broncos organization, according to the players who were surveyed, even though it wasn't enough for him to keep his job. I can also tell you from doing my research on this whole situation that Broncos fans were certainly surprised by this because they didn't really like him, and they were happy to see him go because they essentially blamed him. They thought that he was the main reason that the Broncos had so many guys on the injured reserve over the past couple of seasons. Now, personally, I'll be honest with you, I have never subscribed to the idea that strength coaches are the main reasons why guys get hurt. I'm not an expert in the field, and they clearly have some responsibility in the way that they train guys and how that could lead to injuries, especially with like soft tissue injuries like a hamstring or something like that. But I think that people just attribute way too many injuries to the strength coach. Like, it's not the strength coach's fault if the NFL team signs a player who has a history of shoulder injuries and that guy's shoulder injury flares up again. Like, that happens at every single level. And hell, even under Matt Balis, Notre Dame had offseason injuries. Like, Jarrett Patterson suffered an injury. He suffered a torn pectoral muscle during the offseason training program. Like, sometimes injuries happen. Sometimes injuries happen during the season. As a matter of fact, it happens a lot, especially in the NFL. So to just blame that all on the Broncos strength coach just doesn't seem to make a ton of sense to me, and it just seems like the Broncos fans needed a fall guy. But it is true that the Broncos suffered a lot of injuries under Landau's watch. In 2022, they had more money spent on IR than any other team in the league. So it is something to monitor during his time at Notre Dame, but I'm not ready to say it's a red flag or anything like that, because most of what Landau does actually specializes in injury prevention. I've actually listened to some other interviews with and some about Landau, and players said he'll be even more successful after he's left the Broncos organization because they think that highly of him, and they think that he was kind of a scapegoat in the whole thing. So what does this all mean for Notre Dame, right? I think it's a calculated risk by Marcus Freeman to take this program to the next level. He said he was looking for someone on the cutting edge, someone who did things a little bit differently, who might have had a little bit different of an approach. And it's not to say that he wanted something completely different than Matt Balis, because like I told you earlier, he literally was looking at his right-hand man in David Ballou. So it's not like he wanted to go completely away from that. And I know that there are some people out there, I've seen it on message boards, that are saying that, oh, well, now the fact that Marcus Freeman isn't just hiring Matt Balis to be the strength coach again might suggest that those two didn't always get along. Look, I don't know all the facts. I don't think any of us will ever know all of the facts. I can assure you any reports about that and that being the reason why Matt Balis decided to resign the day before, that is not true, okay? I don't know what is 100% factual about the whole circumstance. That is not true. The idea that Freeman and Balis didn't really see eye to eye. You can put that to bed. Anyway, let's get back to the main focus here. I think this is a risk by Freeman because he just doesn't have any experience running college strength programs. Like, just because he hasn't done it before doesn't mean that he can't do it, but it's a risk in that sense, right? I think it'd be a safer pick to someone who, has been a really successful college strength and conditioning coach. If he did that, everyone would be like, oh, it's a home run hire, even though we don't know whether or not it would work out at Notre Dame or not. I do think it has the potential to be really great, because I think Landau has shown that he has the intelligence and the teaching ability to improve the performance of some of the best athletes in the entire world. So if he can unlock the peak potential or anything close to that from most of the players on Notre Dame's roster, then he can take this program even further than Matt Balis did. And Matt Balis was phenomenal at his job. That's not a knock on Matt Balis. It's just saying that when you go a different route, someone who is at this level who could provide an entirely new spark to the whole thing, like, the sky's the limit with a guy like Loren Landow. But at this point, I think it'd be dumb of me to say, oh, this is a home run hire or it's a bad hire. That just seems foolish because we just don't know. We could say that about any assistant coach, and I know that's not why you come to listen to this podcast to see, hey, it might work out, it might not, but in this case, it's kind of how I feel, right? I feel like we should all be in wait-and-see mode because I'm certainly hopeful. I think there's plenty of evidence to think that this will work, but whenever you make a hire, you really don't know. You don't know what the fit is going to be. You don't know how he's going to work at Notre Dame. You don't know how he's going to work with college kids. Like, there's a lot of unknowns in this situation. But again, you just kind of have to put your trust in Marcus Freeman because this was such an extensive search, and this is the guy that he wants, and this is the guy that it looks like they're going to go with for now. Again, none of this is official yet. We'll keep you updated here on the podcast, but that's what we know as of now, and that's how I'm feeling about it today. All right, coming up next, let's switch gears here. Let's talk about Notre Dame's new left tackle. Are the Irish really about to replace Joe Walt with a true freshman? Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. As I mentioned at the top of the show, the biggest surprise to me coming out of Marcus Freeman's press conference is that Charles Jagusah is expected to start at left tackle in place of Joe Alt for the Sun Bowl. Most people, myself included, figured that senior Tosh Baker would get the start because he was listed as the backup on the depth chart at left tackle all season long. And maybe this is just another reminder to not read too much into any depth chart that the school gives out, because it seems like a formality at this point. Honestly, it's felt like that for a long time. But even then, like, it's still a surprise because Charles Jagusah's only snaps this season came at guard in the blowout against Stanford. So it seemed like he was going to end up playing guard, even though he was listed as a tackle coming out of high school. There were some reports, even in fall camp, that maybe it would make more sense for him to play at guard. But he was ranked. He was a really highly ranked recruit coming out of high school. He was ranked just outside the top 50 in the 24/7 Sports composite. He was the number 7th ranked tackle in the entire class. And he did have a bit of a slow start at Notre Dame because he didn't enroll early. He showed up a little bit out of shape because he had just finished recovering from surgery. So I'm not saying that as a knock to him. Like, that's really difficult coming back from major surgery, trying to get ready for your first ever fall camp. But then, honestly, about like halfway through the year, we started to hear some reports coming out of practice that Charles Jagusah was really impressive. And by that point, he was already working with the twos in practice. But it's just such an incredible jump to go from a true freshman at the bottom of the depth chart at the start of fall camp to become the starting left tackle by the end of it, even for someone who is highly recruited as him. Now, Tosh Baker is still in the mix to start. He is actually competing with Emil Wagner to start at right tackle, and this could mean a bunch of different things. Like, glass half full, optimistic approach to this would be that Charles Jagusah is really that special, and he's ready to take the reins from Joe Alt at left tackle at the end of his freshman season. It's rare for a true freshman to start on the offensive line, but then again, Joe Alt started as a true freshman about halfway through his freshman season in place of first it was Tosh Baker, or first it was Blake Fisher, who was starting as a true freshman in his first ever game in the blue and gold. He was the opening day starter at left tackle. Then it was Tosh Baker who came in for a little bit, and then it was Joe Alt. So it's not unprecedented for a true freshman to start at left tackle for Notre Dame, especially as of late, even though it had not happened for a while from Blake Fisher. I think Sam Young was the first or the last freshman left tackle to start on opening day before Blake Fisher. But I guess the pessimistic approach would be that maybe Notre Dame just doesn't see Tosh Baker as a reliable option, even though he has a ton of experience on playing for Notre Dame. Next year will be his 5th year for the program, and maybe they just were like, look, they're pretty similar in their talent right now. It just makes more sense to give the young guy a shot. I can't say for certain because I'm not at every practice. So we're going to get a good idea what this all looks like in the bowl game. For one, it adds a new level of intrigue for the bowl game, which is frankly in need of it with all the opt-outs and stuff that's been going on. It seems like every time a Notre Dame player opts out, Oregon State is like, all right, we'll do the same. And then another Notre Dame player will do it, and then another Oregon State player will do it. I'm pretty sure that the kicker for Oregon State is opting out, which is maybe the most ridiculous thing. Like, look, I get opt-outs, but like, if you're a kicker, come on, dude. Anyway, if Jagusah comes in and shows out, I think it might completely change the complexion of the offseason and what Notre Dame needs to do in the transfer portal, because I have been open about the fact that I think Notre Dame should look to add a starting left tackle, or really just a starting tackle in the transfer portal, someone who's has experience at the position. And I still feel that way, to be honest with you. I'm not ready to say that, oh, well, Charles Jagusah is going to start, let's not get a transfer. No. I think they should still do that because they still don't have any experience at right tackle, even if Charles Jagusah ends up coming in and lighting the world on fire. So I still think they need to add a transfer. But if they don't add one and Jagusah does end up playing really well, maybe Tosh Baker plays well at right tackle, or Emil Wagner, if one of those guys just takes that job and runs with it, then maybe the Notre Dame coaching staff will feel better about that position moving forward, and the desperation or the necessity to get a tackle in the portal might not be as extreme. I think it's personally risky both ways, right? Like, if Jagusah comes in and shows out, at that point, is it worth it to add a guy in the portal? Because then you risk slowing down Jagusah's development, and maybe you put him behind, whereas if you just let him play, work out those mistakes early on, he'll be better for it in the long run. And then there's the obvious risk of playing what would be a redshirt freshman left tackle next season. Like, it's a really difficult decision, and I'm not ready to say that whatever Charles Jagusah does in the bowl game is going to solidify my decision about him for the future. Like, I expect him to make mistakes. Even Joe Alt wasn't completely stellar when he started as a true freshman, even though he did stabilize that line, which was a real good sign that, hey, that Notre Dame might have something with him because he did so well so early on. And then even though he had mistakes, like he really improved, and then he became Joe Alt, the two-time All-American. So it would be pretty crazy if Notre Dame went from having one true freshman left tackle who turned in, the next great Notre Dame left tackle, and then just immediately replace him with the next freshman who ended up being that good. Like, it almost seems too good to be true. But then again, Notre Dame has just had such a storied history at the offensive line, and particularly at that position, that it wouldn't be that surprising, right? Just think about Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, Mike McGlinchey, now Joe Alt, Liam Eichenberg, all future studs in the NFL. And maybe Charles Jagusah is next in line for the whole thing, and we're going to start to see it in the Sun Bowl. I can't wait. I'm really excited to watch him and the rest of the team play. Last thing on Jagusah, Harry Hiestand loved him. Like, absolutely loved him. Coming out of high school, was a can't-miss prospect, and maybe that should have been a sign all along. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. We've got a few more episodes coming your way this week before I take some time off for the holidays, but the best way to stay up to date with everything we're doing here on the podcast is to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the pod. You can also follow the show on social media. You can follow us on X at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal X account is at Tyler, WOJCIAK. I'll see you guys tomorrow.